Okay, so I think we should be good and going. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Ventura, and I am today's session leader. I hold a BA in Political Science and History and a Master's in Education from Brock University from 2012 and 2017, respectively. I'm co-hosting today's session and representing the Brock University Alumni Board of Directors. During this virtual homecoming, we have alumni joining us from across Canada and internationally. And knowing this, we would like to begin today's event with a land acknowledgement where we recognize the Indigenous communities that originally inhabited this land, where we all come together today. Brock University acknowledges the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish Was One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. I would encourage you to research the land on which you live and find out its treaty history and learn about the people who occupied this land since time immemorial before the arrival of European colonists. There are a couple of housekeeping items I would like to mention before we get started. This webinar, including all others throughout Homecoming, will be available for viewing on the on-demand section of the Homecoming Hub. I encourage you all to explore the Homecoming Hub following this session and add any events to your agenda that you may have missed, as well as learn more about the perks and benefits that come with being a Brock graduate. Finally, we encourage you to type any questions you may have throughout the presentation in the chat box, or raise your hand to ask the speaker yourself. Simply click chat at the bottom of your screen to access the chat box, or click reactions to raise your hand. I will bring your raised hands or chat box questions to Kaitlyn's attention. We're going to stop at the end of each of her 3 sections for any questions. So please feel free to chat that in. With those housekeeping items out of the way, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker who will be guiding us through today's discussion. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by Kaitlyn Daw, a communications professional and small town photographer based in Fenwick, Ontario. Kaitlyn graduated from Brock University in 2016 with a BA in English Language and Literature, where she was the recipient of the Brock University Sergate Award and the Brock University Spirit of Brock Award. As the owner of Kaitlyn Daw Photography, Kaitlyn spends her weekends and evenings hosting sessions ranging from engagements and weddings to newborns and cake smashes, family portraits, special events, and corporate headshots. Her photography style is rooted in capturing raw emotion and creating a client experience that brings their authentic selves into the frame. Thank you, Kaitlyn, for being here to share your expertise with us. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for being here today and spending your lunch with me. I'm very excited to go through this session with you. I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get started. So the purpose of this session is to really give you guys the fundamental strategies to take better photos on your phone. So we're going to explore basic principles to understand just your camera phone in general, and then explore simple strategies that you can implement related to lighting and composition and just framing your shot to elevate your phone photography game. If you left your phone in the kitchen, go grab it now. There's just a couple little activities, so if you have it nearby, that would be great. I just want you guys to get familiar with your phones if you're not already. We're going to explore a couple features and do a couple of other simple activities. So before we dive into that, I just want to throw it out to you guys. You're all here for a reason. So what are the things that you want to take better photos of using your phone? If you can drop them in the chat just to get a sense of where everyone is. Scenic photos, pets and kids. Yeah, my phone is pretty much all of my dog now. Selfies. Business, food. Awesome. This is great. Land-based teachings, travel, story with pics. This is great. Okay, so there's a good variety of things. So that's great to know. I really built this session around, oh, there were a bunch of things that just came through. This is awesome. So I built this session around, I tried to build it so it was less focused on what phone you have, because it's very unlikely that we all have the same device with the same features. So the examples, I've included some videos and some photos to provide some examples and try to make the session as engaging virtually as possible with a more static format. And we're really focusing on the strategies that you can use and less of an emphasis on the features that your phone has. So if you aren't using a Samsung like me, this session is still going to be relevant to you. Okay. All right, so what we're going to explore today, I've broken it down into 4 main sections. So we're first going to touch on camera phone modes. Like I said, I'm not going to get too technical or focus too much on this since it will vary by person, but we're going to go over a couple of the common ones that are fairly universal across phones. We're going to explore lighting fundamentals, so basic tips and strategies and just understanding the importance of light in your photos. And then we're going to go through some composition basics. So this is all around framing your shot and getting creative and taking more dynamic images with your camera phone. And then I'm going to briefly touch on some editing as a strategy to increase the quality of your photos. Okay, so camera modes. These, I listed off a couple. So I have this video, I'm just gonna let it play while I'm talking. This is just me going through a bunch of the different features that are available on my phone. You might see the same ones, yours might be different, but every phone has a default menu of options. So if you're scrolling through your phone, if you can just open up your camera app and scroll through and see what features are available to you. If you have a newer camera, if you have a newer smartphone, then you might have a pro photo mode, which gives you full range over things like aperture, shutter, which is what this video is going through right now, white balance. It gives you the full range. A little more complicated if you're not familiar with what all of those things mean. So don't let that intimidate you, but there's burst mode, portrait mode is included in a lot of newer phones now. The mode being featured in the video right now is for food, so you can focus and it blurs and kind of the rest of the image out. So I know a few people said they were interested in food, so check out if your phone has that feature. There's Panorama, which is pretty standard across smartphones now. Selfie mode, your basic photo mode, and then HDR, which stands for high dynamic range. Now, essentially what that means is that when your camera takes a photo, it will try to expose the image as close as possible to like even. High dynamic range means it's going to basically take 3 different images at different exposures. So you get a wider range of your shadows, your highlights. It just gives you a richer photo. If you were to use a DSLR, like a digital camera, some of the hobbyist or professional cameras have a feature that helps you achieve this, and it's called bracketing. On a Canon camera, I'm not sure what Nikon's or Sony's, if they refer to it the same way, but it's the same concept. So see if your phone has other camera modes. So in mine, if I scroll all the way to the bottom, I can add more options to right here, like I'm on my screen. It does show me more options that I don't really use, so they're not in my main menu. So definitely check to see if your phone has the capability to add different modes, because you could find something that's really relevant to the things you want to take photos of. Don't need to play that again. And like Chris said, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat. And as we move on to the next section, we will address those. Okay, so I'm just gonna, doesn't want to click. So Chris, do we have any questions before I dive into lighting?
No questions, you're a pro.
Oh, well, thank you. All right, so lighting, I would argue, is one of the most important aspects of photography. Whether it's on your phone, whether you're using a point and shoot camera or a DSLR, lighting is pretty much everything. Think of your camera sensor as the same as your eyes. If you've ever tried to navigate your house in the middle of the dark, you probably stumble a little bit. It's hard to see. And your camera's the same way. So if you don't have enough light, it's going to have a hard time reading the environment and picking up that photo or that image that you're trying to capture. It'll also be more difficult for your camera to focus. So when you're trying to take a photo, it's really important to identify your light source, and then there's ways that you can increase your exposure without having artificial lighting like a professional or anything like that. So I'm just going to clear my screen. So yeah, you want to find the best source of light. So whether you're shooting indoors and you have a window, maybe you want to go towards the window the closer to the light you are. If you have sheer curtains, it can help create really nice diffused light. Shadows hold more detail than highlights. So basically that means that if you're taking an image outside, this has probably happened to everyone here because I know it's certainly happened to me, and you're taking a photo and it's really bright and there's no way for you to capture an image without either blowing out the sky so it's completely white or almost entirely white, or having the subject, whether it's a person or a thing, being really dark in your image. So if you find this and you've tried to either edit a photo down to bring down those highlights and make it less bright, but it gets kind of almost yellow tint and it looks really fake, that's because you've burned your highlights or you've blown them out. So essentially what that means is there is no detail that exists within that part of your photo. Your camera isn't able to recognize that data, like it just can't compute. Your camera sensor in your phones and whether it's a point and shoot DSLR, they don't have the same dynamic range that we do when we see. So the maximum light and maximum darks that it can register is a lot smaller than what we see, which is why it can be really frustrating when you're trying to take that beautiful sunset photo and it's not turning out the way that you would hope. It never quite seems to do it justice. So one strategy that you can implement is try to expose for your highlights. So if you're taking a photo outside and it's in the middle of the day, you can't really move anywhere else, and you want the sky to have detail, whether it's the clouds or they look really cool, or it's just a more captivating image. If you click on your screen, you should be able to lock focus and adjust. There should be like a little adjustment that you can make either up or down to increase or decrease your exposure. So it'll make it either a little lighter or a little darker. If you move that slider down until your highlights aren't blown out, where you can't see that detail anymore, you can bring those shadows up using some kind of, whether it's an in-phone app for editing photos, whether it's Lightroom for mobile, there will be more detail saved in those shadows than in the highlights. So you're more likely to be able to recover the darks in the image by bringing them up. But it's something to experiment with, because you don't want to go too far, because you will get very grainy photos if it's like completely dark. So there's limitations, and that's why you need to play. And I find that's the best way to learn. So the other thing is to avoid flat or harsh direct sunlight if you can. So I want everybody to take your hand and just kind of put it out in front of you. And wherever you are, it doesn't matter if you're by a window, you should have some kind of light source near you. Okay, so face the palm towards you. Now I want you to just rotate and watch the shadows on your hands as you do that. So as the light is casting, you're going to notice, you know, when the light is direct, you might, depending on how direct, there's going to be harsh lines, harsh shadows on your palm, okay, where the folds and stuff from your palm is. And then if you keep moving it, you'll see softer light. This is one strategy you can use to find flattering light if you're having trouble getting that concept, or you know, you're shooting on location or you're somewhere. You might feel a little ridiculous walking around like this, but it's one thing to help you understand how light is falling down on a subject and how that creates either flattering or unflattering light. It's going to change throughout the day. So when the sun is right above you, you can't really hide from it very much unless you're using a tree to block the light source. So these are some strategies that you can use to find more flattering light. And then if you're shooting indoors, this would be more relevant to indoor photography, but pay attention to multiple light sources and the temperatures of those light bulbs. So if you're in a room that has incandescent and you know, fluorescent lighting, your camera is going to have a harder time getting your white balance right, because there's different hues and colors being incorporated into that. So just be mindful of the different light sources that you're using. Fluorescent lights actually also, the speed in which it runs, sometimes if you're shooting like in a burst mode, or you're taking a video, you might notice lines in the light, and that's because your camera is running at the same speed as the light, which is an interesting. We can't see that with our eyes, but the camera picks it up. Now, got a little ahead of myself there. So this is my beautiful sister. She was a trooper and was my model for this session. So I'm going to show you some examples. I have a few videos to show different angles and different concepts. I'm a very visual person, so this helps me learn. So I'm hoping that you guys will be able to pull some nuggets of information from the session in the same way. So an example of taking photos in harsh light, the image on the left, she was facing directly towards the sun. You can see by the angle of her body and the direction of the shadow that she is fully in the sun on this day. We were shooting around 3 p.m. So it wasn't directly above her. And it's not a terrible photo, but it could be better. She's squinting. There's the shadows are distracting from the bottom right corner and around. There's different guiding lines that detract away from her. So what we ended up doing was turning around. So instead, I used the sun to light her from behind and framed my photo, and look at how much softer the light is around her face. The shadows aren't as harsh. It doesn't show as many imperfections. None of these photos have been edited. So it's just really flattering, soft light. It almost looks like I have a reflector or something. It's just, she's sun-kissed. This is just one way. It's really important that you move your body, find a different perspective, play around with the light, see where it falls, and watch those shadows on the face. We still have some shadows that are creating depth in her face, but not in an unflattering way. It's not a harsh shadow, either under her eyes or under her nose, but it's just soft light with some highlights that create dimensions, so it's not flat. Those are the kinds of things you'll want to look for to take a decent photo in camera. Now this image I could have and probably should have exposed for the highlights. As you can see in the back, there's no way I'm getting that detail back. But for the purpose of this photo, I was focusing on the actual subject and didn't want to edit the images. So if I was doing this for myself, I would have exposed this, I would have underexposed this and then edited it to bring up the shadows on her. So that way I wouldn't lose as much in the background. Okay. Okay, so some tips. I know this is one thing that a lot of people struggle with, is shooting in harsh light. So sometimes you're at the park and there really isn't anything but open space. So how can you, whether you're a parent or you're playing with your fur baby in the park or anywhere out in the daylight, these are some strategies that you can use. I'm just going to play this video to show some examples. So she is facing the light, the sun at this moment. Now, right now, the sun is directly behind her. Now, see how the camera is kind of struggling to expose for my subject. It keeps, every time I take a photo, it keeps like bouncing back up and blowing out my sky. You know, one of the strategies you can use, like in this example, the sun is a little more to the right of her instead of being directly behind her. This will still, you know, if it's in the middle of the day, it's still going to struggle, but trying different modes like portrait mode right now in the video, or trying different angles. So right now I'm shooting a little more down than up. So my camera was having an easier time exposing for my subject and not blowing out the highlights as much as before. So if you have trees in the area and you don't need to shoot in an open space, look for shade. Shade is your friend. Try not to, if it's even shade, that's ideal. If you see like speckles of light, you're going to look a bit like a giraffe if you're shooting in that kind of light, depending on which direction you're facing. We call that speckled light. So that's not ideal. You want to avoid that. But if there's even shade, that's a great place to take photos. You know, it's just creates more even light. You can use your subject to try and block the light depending on the time of day. You can turn them away like I did in these examples where their back is facing and try to have it off to the side. And then, yeah, if you're shooting directly into the sun, if you're lighting your subject from behind, just be mindful if the sun is like right there and you aren't blocking it with anything like a tree branch or any other object like a building, You will get sun flares that may, if it's the look you're going for, that's great. But you will often get a haze on your photos because your camera just cannot register your subject due to the dynamic range I was talking about. So, and then of course, adjust your exposure. So in that video, there was a lot of examples of me bringing the highlights down to try and recover as much detail in that photo as I could. Okay. Does anyone have questions about lighting before we move on?
Just one question about color temperature and what exactly that means. Are you feeling the bulb for how hot it is, or is it
no,
something else?
sorry. So color temperature, I'm referring to the actual, the light color. Okay, so fluorescent lighting is more of a blue light. Okay, incandescent would be, I can actually use this as an example. I have a light here, so I'm going to turn it all the way. So that is the coolest temperature of my light, or I can bring it all the way down and see how like I'm warmer. So it's really just, if you have a mix of warm and cool lighting, it can just create confusion for your camera, and your colors might come out a bit strange. So that's something that you can edit in an app if it really bothers you, but it's just something to be mindful of. You know, you'll notice that most in restaurant situations where they have a bunch of different types of lighting. Some is more harsh and some is a lot warmer. So it will impact the colors that how your camera reads the colors in your photo. Was that it?
Yep, that was the only question.
Okay. All right, so let's go into composition, which is also a super, super important aspect of photography. This is what will really level up your photography game. So, I mean, a lot of people talk about don't cut off limbs, don't cut off legs, that kind of stuff. But I'm going to focus more on a few other things. So you've probably heard about the rule of thirds. So I won't go too much into that, but essentially the rule of thirds is a concept where I have your phone might have a feature where on my Samsung, I can add the grid to my camera, which I did for the purpose of this session. You'll notice it in the videos that I share if you haven't already. But essentially the rule of thirds is really to help you identify you know, and frame your subject in a way where there's good balance, or identifying guiding lines. And it's a really basic principle that I think is a great place to start when you're exploring composition in your photos. And then I encourage you to break them. Because once you understand the basic principles of the rule of thirds and taking a good photo, then you have an understanding to break some of those rules and get some really dynamic images. So the rule of thirds isn't the be all end all, but it's a great start. If your phone has the ability to shoot in black and white, I know some iPhones have that capability to do like monochrome. They have monochrome filters. A lot of people find this helpful in terms of understanding highlights and shadows and composition, because it takes away the distraction of the colors and it makes you focus more on the scene itself. So where are there darks? Where are the lines and patterns, things that you can use to frame your image? So those are things that I'm always looking for. You may, if you're looking through your images, you may realize that you already do that. I know I didn't really consciously think about it when I first started doing photography. And then when I was going through my images, I realized I have a very linear guiding line. I just naturally line up very linear patterns. Some people, you can do things like stairwells or staircases. It could be a winding path, and just the way that it fits in your frame, it just creates more depth, and it makes your images more dynamic. Watch for distracting artifacts in your images. So what I mean by that is, if I'm taking a picture of my sister in the park, I need to be mindful of what's behind her. So if there's a tree, I don't want branches sticking out of her head to make them look like antlers. So being mindful of distracting things in your background before you take the shot. First you need to find your light and figure out which direction you're going to be shooting in, and then pay attention to what's around you. So when you're framing your shot, how are you drawing attention to the thing that you're photographing? How is your surroundings? How are they impacting that image? Are they complementing it, or are they distracting from it? And I have an example of some strategies you can use to get some interesting photos and use your subject to block out some of these distracting things. Zoom with your feet, not your fingers. So I know it can be tempting to just stay in one place and zoom in with your fingers and capture an image of something further away that way. If you can move, I encourage you to move. Get closer to the subject, get down, get high, get low, get high, move around, try different angles, explore different perspectives. It'll really, the more that you do that, instead of just shooting from your standing position, the more creative and dynamic your images will be, regardless of what it is. Whether it's taking photos of food, or you're taking candid photos of your kids, or trying to get your cat to pay attention to you. These are all strategies that you can implement in any type of photography you're doing. Try not to overcomplicate. Sometimes the simplest of compositions are the most powerful. So try not to get it in your head too much, and don't be afraid to experiment. I'll be a broken record by the end of this, but I cannot stress enough, playing around with your camera on your phone is going to be the best way to learn. See what its limitations are, play with different modes, see what it can do, and see what works for you. And everyone has a different kind of eye. They see things in a different way. So how I might shoot things in portrait mode might be a little bit different than you. So play around, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because it doesn't have to be perfect. So in this example, we're in the same location as that original photo that I used as an example of harsh light versus softer, more flattering light. So what I did was, I noticed these branches kind of coming out, and there was a bit of a peak within the branches. So I had my sister go in, just so you can see how we framed this image. So instead of just taking a random photo in front of the bushes and the nice greenery, we tried to do something different. So we used, by her just stepping a couple feet into a little space, she didn't actually have to go into the bush, she just had to go behind those branches. And then I was able to peek in with my camera, with my phone, and take a photo with these leaves, creating depth of field. Okay, so you can see they're blurred out, she's in focus, the background's blurred. This one was shot in portrait mode, so it creates that bokeh effect, which is where you have a blurry background. So this is artificial. You can kind of see it. It's not perfect up here in the top right. The AI just didn't register that this should be blurry too. It's not perfect, but it still makes a nice image if you're just shooting things on your phone for your personal use. Now, There's lots of different ways that you can creatively frame your subject like this. So I encourage you, when you're out and about and you're trying to take photos of things, look for what's in your surroundings and how can you create depth in your images to make them more interesting. Okay, now here's an example of what I was talking about, distracting objects. So, you know, I'm sure my sister didn't really want this garbage can in the background, this blue atrocity here. And you can see the bench behind her in between these two beautiful trees. It's actually going through her head, which looks a bit awkward. So I'm going to play this video to show how I blocked these images out and just ended up getting an image that focused more on her. I would argue, to me, these trees are competing on the same level as her. I find them more distracting than complementary to the scene, just because there's so much space in this foreground here, and so much space on the sides. It doesn't really, even though she's in the center of the image, it just doesn't feel very compelling. So I'm just going to play this video. Now, what I did for these images, for this image, I flipped my phone upside down. Okay, so notice how there's less foreground here, and notice how the bench is no longer in the image, and neither is the garbage can. Okay. This is one way that you can get, you know, if you flip your phone upside down to take an image, it will automatically rotate it back, or you can easily rotate the image if it doesn't. But this is one way that you can get more dynamic angles in your photos. This works great for example, if you're taking photos of a beautiful image of like the lake or an ocean, and there's sand dunes and beautiful long grass, and you want to create foreground and get a beautiful landscape picture, but actually have something in the foreground to make it more dynamic. If you flip your phone upside down, you can actually you'll get a different angle on that scene that is a lot more captivating. So the final image from this experiment is this photo. So I made her laugh, and you know, if I was to edit this, I would fix up my horizon line. So I'm angled here because I think I was laughing too. We're not perfect, but in this image, it's a great example of how we went from originally having a bench going through her head and a garbage can as an eyesore, to just my sister sitting in the middle of a park with these gorgeous trees framing her now instead of competing with her. And it's just a lot better of a photo and more interesting, just by simply moving closer and angling my phone and turning it upside down. Okay. I was low to the ground. I wasn't afraid to get in there. But this is how you can get better photos with your phone. Okay. Another strategy that you can use to get more dynamic images is using your panorama function. Now, most phones, I believe now, have a panorama mode. So in this example, I'm just going to show, you know, you might originally take a photo with the whole tree and the sun peeking through, but you can't really see your subject in that photograph. So here I am moving a little closer to get some examples of different ways you can frame it, but we lose so much of the tree like this. So what I'm about to show you in this video is, if we use the panorama, instead of going from left to right, we can actually go from bottom to top. And this is one way you can create more dynamic images that have something tall that you want to still be the main focus in the image, or more prominent in the image, but still get that length of the other objects. So here's a resulting image. I've composed it so that way there's this guiding line. It's almost a little curve here. We've got beautiful blues peeking through, and she's a lot closer than in this video here. But this is one strategy. The tree looks a bit distorted here because it was a bit windy. It's not great for photos under a tree, but it's awesome for buildings. So say you wanted to get a photo in front of the Brock statue or the Schmann Tower. This could be a great way to get more of that in your image. I know any photos that I had before I really dabbled in really seeing what my camera on my phone could do. Any photos that I have in front of the tower, in front of the statue, is either close up and you can kind of see bits and pieces of Sir Isaac Brock, or it's, I'm tiny just to be able to get him in the full picture. So this is one way that you could get the best of both worlds. So here's a side-by-side comparison of that evolution from being further back to being up a little closer, and then combining those two ideas using the panorama in a way that you might not have thought of before. Okay. I had to include a photo of my beautiful dog, Rosie. This is just an example of rule of thirds and finding balance in your photos. So after our photo shoot with my sister, I came home and the sun was peeking through the trees. Now I angled myself in a way that blocked some of the sunlight so it wouldn't take away from the details in the subject, which was my dog. So the clarity in her face and her fur is a lot, it's just really high quality because it was really soft light coming through and it wasn't competing with the image. It was blocked enough that my camera wasn't struggling to focus on the thing I was trying to take a photo of. Now, in terms of balance in this image, you can see with the rule of thirds that her head is in like the dead center of this image. She's a little off to the left, but I wanted to use this as an example because her head is tilted. So even though she's a little to the left, the image still feels balanced because of the direction she's looking in. And the birch tree over here has a lot more weight than the tree over here. So there's different elements of the photo that are working together to create a sense of balance in an image. And this is how you can use the rule of thirds to help frame your image to ensure that you're focusing on the right things. You can see this horizon line is along the, everything kind of lines up in those general connection points. So I just wanted to throw this in there as an example of rule of thirds in case anyone wasn't super familiar with it. But generally the idea is you want where these blocks connect is where you want interesting things to happen. So a lot of times if I'm photographing a person, this top line over here, you want to line up with their eyes. Okay, so if someone's a little angled, just line up in between their eyes. Play around with crops and see what feels right. But that's a pretty standard rule of thumb in portrait photography. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so in addition to the rule of thirds, these are also examples of leading lines, or sometimes referred to as guiding lines. I referred to this earlier in the session as well, but these are great for creating a sense of depth and drawing your eyes to the thing that you want people to see. So usually if you're taking a photo of a person, it's a person. But if you do architecture type photography, or you're taking photos of food, or you're taking photos, you're traveling, and you want to get some beautiful travel photography, where you're in an alleyway and there's like all of these guiding lines, almost like leading to a path towards you. These are all strategies that you can use. Guiding lines will create a sense of depth and guide people where you want them to look. So in this middle image, this path, the way I framed it, they both of these lines end where her face is. So like when you're looking at the image, it draws you to her expression, to her smile. Another thing to note, this kind of goes back to lighting. Our eyes are naturally drawn to the brightest part of an image. Okay, so if you're taking photos of, your kids, you'll want their face generally to be the lightest part of the image, because that's whatever the focal point is, should generally be the lightest part, because that's what our eyes are drawn to. But these guiding lines help with that as well. So in this photo on the left, you can see, the way that the path it's basic principle of perspective. Things get smaller the further they're away. So here it's almost a highway towards my subject. So it creates this really visual framing, and the clouds were just unreal that day. So they almost create a framing, like they almost frame her from the top as well. And then in this image on the right, the way that the fence is going through the middle of the image, it balances it. But the angle of her elbow also creates guiding lines up to her face from where it connects with the fence, or the railing. And when she looks down, it creates kind of this circular motion of where your eyes go, and her face being the lightest part of the image, you're automatically kind of guided to end there. So these are just some examples of how you can use leading lines to create depth, or draw people's eyes towards where you want them to look. Are there any questions there before we?
No questions.
Okay. I'm just gonna very quickly, I don't have a lot to say about editing other than there's a ton of different apps you can use. In this example, I'm just going through some of the different features and elements you can use to edit an image in Lightroom on mobile. So that if you're intimidated by the idea of Lightroom, then fret not. It is, you can either be as complicated or simplistic as you want with it. It is a very powerful tool, and it's free on mobile. So if you are looking for an editing app that can do a little more than maybe your standard camera phone, the standard app with your phone, it is an option that doesn't cost anything. So this is where you can really create more depth to your image, adjust colors. So, the original image was quite nice in my opinion, but just by increasing those shadows, I can create a more dynamic, dramatic image if I want, or I could make it softer. It's really up to you, but editing is kind of that last step when you mix all of the other ingredients together to take a really nice photo. If you want to take it a little step further, you can play around with the exposure and highlights and shadows and play around with color correction and things like that in post. So I'm just going to click here. So these are a couple examples. So there's that one from the video, the before. The colors aren't as rich and you don't really notice until it's side by side. against an edited photo, and I didn't really do a whole lot to this one. I just played with the exposure adjustments a bit. And then I love black and white for photos that have texture or are very emotional. So if there's like an emotional moment where, you know, someone's really happy, or, you know, there's just a lot of emotion or passion in an image, I really love to put that in black and white, because I find, as much as I love color, it can be distracting sometimes. So this is just an example of how, like, I probably would have discarded this image as like, meh, but I love it in black and white. It has a mood that fits the image that, you know, to me, it wasn't a winner as a photo in color, but for black and white, I think it works. So that's just to give you kind of an idea of some different things you can do with editing software. And that's it. I will take any questions that we have.
There's two quick questions. One was, what is the name of the app again? I think someone else might have answered it, but if you just want to go over that again.
Can you say that again? Sorry, you cut out.
Sorry, somebody was just asking what the app was that you're using to edit.
I was using Lightroom. There is a mobile version. So if you go to Adobe, you can, or whether it's the Apple Store or the Play Store, depending on what your device is, you can use the app for free. If you use any of the desktop versions, that's what you have to pay it for with a plan. But the mobile version is free, and it has pretty much all of the capabilities that the desktop version does.
Awesome. And then Leopold asked, how do I turn my camera upside down? I have a new 5G Samsung. When I turn it upside down, the image writes itself.
So when you flip your camera upside down, it should still, like, even if the image itself rotates with your phone, the angle should be different, because when I am, just for example, taking my phone, if I'm shooting from up here, where the camera is, once I flip it upside down, I'm getting a completely different perspective, right? So play around and see, like, if you take an image in one spot with it upright and then flip it upside down, just compare the two images, because they should still look different, even if it writes itself and automatically rotates in the preview. I hope that answers your question. But yeah, it's awesome. Honestly, flipping your phone upside down is a total game changer. You know, it doesn't work in every situation, but absolutely, you know, it's a great example of why playing and trying different things and just seeing what works and what doesn't in different circumstances, you know, it's awesome. I do it all the time. All right.
No additional questions, but some great responses and feedback saying thank you for the awesome session so far.
Awesome.
Somebody, Marilyn's asking, how do you zoom in on wildlife, or what would you suggest if you're shooting wildlife that may not get close, like the little fox that was in the backyard?
Well, that one, I would say zooming with your fingers is okay. You know, obviously, if they're, depending on the wildlife that you're photographing to, you want to be safe. You know, I think if you can move closer or angle yourself in ways that you can frame your subject in a more interesting way, then that would be my go-to. But one of the struggles is with the phones is you're very limited to, I mean, to what you can do in terms of if you're taking pictures of birds. Obviously, you can't climb up the tree if, you know, you're trying to take a photo of a bird and it's going to fly away before you get there. So I think the important thing is to not compare your phone images to a professional wildlife photographer that has a $15,000 lens that can zoom and get the most beautiful, crisp action photos of these animals. I think there's limitations to what you can do.
Awesome. Well, I think with that, we are out of time for the session. Thank you so much, Kaitlyn, for your tips and tricks today. I think everyone learned a lot. And if there's any additional questions, feel free to contact Kaitlyn. Her contact information is right there on the screen. She'd be happy to connect with you and continue the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.